If you've been scrolling through endless listings of rack-mount power strips, squinting at the numbers, and still feel like you might end up with a unit that looks great on paper but just won't fit your real-world needs, this review is here to clear that up. I've spent a few days digging through spec sheets, community forums, and the sort of questions that actually get asked on Reddit and in IT help desks, so you can skip the guesswork. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's start with the basic problem most of us face. You've got a small server or a network closet that's already crammed into a 1U or 2U rack, and you need a reliable way to feed a handful of devices, maybe a switch, a NAS, a few US-powered cameras, or a couple of PO injectors without taking up precious vertical space. The CyberPower PDU41102 promises exactly that, a 0U, 24-outlet switched power distribution unit that sits flush against the rack wall, a digital display for real-time monitoring, and remote access so you can see load and status from anywhere on your network. It's the sort of plug-and-play solution that sounds perfect on a data center brochure, but the question is whether it lives up to that promise when you actually hang it up and start plugging things into it. First, who should consider this unit? If you run a small office, a home lab, or a remote site where you have a limited number of power-hungry devices, say, under 15 amps total draw, and you need individual control over each outlet, this PDU is a strong contender. The 24 NEMA 520R outlets are all switchable, meaning you can remotely power cycle a single server or a network switch without having to climb up and manually flip a breaker. That's a massive time saver when you're troubleshooting a stuck process or need to reboot a device that's become unresponsive. The digital display adds a quick glance at total load, which is handy in a cramped rack where you can't afford the surprise of a tripped breaker. On the flip side, if you're looking at a high-density setup, think a blade server chassis or a rack with multiple 30-amp circuits pulling well over 20 amps total, this unit will likely hit its derated limit quickly. Even though it's rated for 30A, CyberPower advises you to treat it as a 24A device under typical load conditions. In practice, that means you should never exceed roughly 190 watts per outlet on average if you plan to use the full complement of 24 sockets. If you're in a scenario where you need to power a rack of servers that collectively draw 30A or more, you'll be better off with a higher capacity PDU that can handle the load without the derating concerns. Now let's talk about the practical strengths. The biggest win for me is the truly 0U footprint. Because the unit slides into the side of a 19-inch rack without taking up any vertical space, you can keep that rack height for actual equipment rather than just a power strip. In a 4U or 6U rack, every millimeter counts, and the PDU sits comfortably against the side rail, freeing up space for airflow. The digital display sits on the front panel and shows voltage, current, and load percentage, letting you see at a glance if you're approaching that 24A ceiling. For anyone who has ever had an unexpected overload and had to pull the whole rack down to check, that visual cue is a genuine safety net. Remote monitoring is another strong point. CyberPower's built-in Ethernet interface lets you connect the PDU to your local network, and you can view status and control outlets through their web console or SNMP-compatible monitoring tools. For IT admins who already have a network monitoring suite, this means you can pull the PDU into the same dashboard you use for servers and switches. If a device starts drawing too much current, you'll get an alert and can shut that outlet off before a breaker trips. In a small lab where you're experimenting with different configurations, that level of control can prevent a lot of frustration. The unit also offers a decent amount of flexibility in outlet placement. All 24 outlets are arranged in a single row, which makes cable routing simple and predictable. You won't have to deal with a tangled mess of staggered sockets where a thick power cord blocks neighboring outlets, a common annoyance with some older PDUs. This straight-line layout works well with standard 18-inch rack depth setups and allows you to neatly route cords to the back of the rack, keeping the front clear for visual checks. However, there are a few practical weaknesses you should be aware of before you click Add to Cart. The first is the lack of surge protection. The PDU is essentially a switched strip. It doesn't provide any line-level filtering or surge suppression. If your facility experiences power spikes or you're in a region with unreliable mains quality, you'll need to place a separate surge protector upstream, which adds another component and potentially another point of failure. The second issue is the relatively low